you all know who I am. I'm Kaitlyn. Amanda.
And Amanda Hsieh here. We are so excited to be celebrating with you our 100th episode of ESG Decoded.
And we're welcoming Dustin Zimmer today. So, since we're doing this live, we thought it would be useful to have a great moderator. Dustin Zimmer is a marketing strategist from the ClimeCo team, and he will be serving as our MC today. Dustin, where are you?
Right here. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be a part of your 100th episode. Thank you for bringing me in. I wanted to remind our audience here to take advantage of the Q&A bubble at the top of the screen. And if you have any questions you'd like to ask throughout the live webinar here, to do so using that Q&A option. So along with that, while we're having the room fill up, I have a very special announcement that we have another host joining us here, Erika Schiller. So why don't we bring her in and she can explain a little bit and her role at the company.
Thanks, Dustin, and thanks, Amanda and Kaitlyn, for inviting me. I'm really excited to be joining as another host for ESG Decoded. I lead our project development organization at ClimeCo, and what that means is we manage projects that create environmental attributes. Those could be carbon offsets. They could be other environmental attributes like plastic credits or compliance credits. And with those, we're making tangible environmental impacts and creating that business case to further accelerate industrial decarbonization. So really excited to be here and talking about energy. My background's in energy, 10 years in the low carbon energy space, and excited to bring on some different topics and participate in this cool enterprise you guys have developed.
Well, I'm just so excited that you accepted our invite to join us as one of our co-hosts, and I'm so looking forward to hearing your conversations, learning from you as well through this medium, this podcast.
Yeah, and we just really, Amanda and I started this, and as most of our long-term listeners would know, when we were little global affairs associates just doing ESG consulting. But now that we are part of a larger organization in ClimeCo, we felt like it would be, we'd be remiss if we weren't talking about a lot of the other areas of impact in our business. And so having Erika come on to be a permanent co-host with us allows us to really expand the types of topics that we can discuss here, and all, of course, with the same depth and breadth of coverage that we like on these topics, and making sure that we are going beyond the headlines as we continue to make that central to our mission of bringing this type of high quality content to the market. So Erika, yay. So excited. Great. So I think maybe before we move to our Q&A, I just had one other question for Erika. And so Erika briefly explained what our project development group does at ClimeCo, but why do these greenhouse gas reductions and other environmental attributes that we bring to life through your group, why does that matter for this audience?
Yeah, so we've been developing carbon projects, and we've reduced over 26 million tons of CO2e from the atmosphere in the about 15 years that ClimeCo has been operating and generating environmental attributes. Those are the actual offsets that we've generated, but often there's activities that aren't crediting that also generate reductions. So we've made some really big impacts to the climate. So I'm really proud of the work that our team has been doing over that period. And I think it's important because, as we think about ESG, a lot of I know you guys talk about the S and the G, but the E, the environmental impact, right? When we think about how do we adapt to climate change? How do we reduce the impacts? How do we slow climate change? We're using this market-based mechanism of carbon offsets and compliance offsets to make real impacts to the environment, to create incentives for industrials to reduce their emissions. And often they need that market mechanism. They're operating in competitive landscapes. They need to stay competitive in order to sell their products. So when there's that market-based mechanism that creates an incentive to reduce, that it kind of benefits everyone. It benefits our climate, it benefits the businesses that are reducing, and it also sets a standard for other businesses to see those opportunities and continue to accelerate the energy transition, because that's the goal.
Thank you so much for that, Erika. A lot of you pre-submitted questions, which we were really grateful for. So I think we're going to go through those. And if you've submitted any to the chat as well, our marketing team will be going through those as well.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to ask the first question here, but I also want to remind anyone listening, if you have a question, please submit it in the Q&A bubble at the top of the screen. First question comes from Cynthia, New York, which is, what is the biggest barrier that brands face internally to allocate sustainability funding?
So, I think for us, often sustainability or ESG or decarbonization efforts come to a company through a team that's focused on that. On those topics, and can sort of be seen as bucketed in this voluntary space. So voluntary reporting, voluntary action. And we've had a lot of success with helping tell that story in the language of risk and opportunity. And so making sure that we're not just talking about how great what we're doing is for the environment or for communities, but really coming in and helping the client, the brand, the company to really understand that this is about risk mitigation, as well as capitalizing on opportunities that are presented by a changing marketplace. And I think at a very high level, those two pieces have, at least in our experience, have helped move the needle on those internal funding conversations. Amanda, I see you both are nodding, so I'll stop there.
I think I was going to go something along the same threads as you were going to answer, as you answered, Kaitlyn, where I think it's connecting it to the business and seeing that it's not just a philanthropy or something like that, but it really is connected to the business, understanding those big macro trends that are happening around the globe and really capturing those opportunities as appropriate to your company. And I think if you can get that initial buy-in and understanding, then it goes from there, right? Then there, of course, there's different, I think challenges to work through, just like any other kind of new initiative, let's say in an organization, but getting that initial buy-in, I think is so critical by really connecting it to the business. And I feel like nowadays, if it's not your investors, it's going to be your clients or your employees if you're requesting something around ESG. Erika, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking that, one of the ways that you could turn this into an opportunity is, what are those new revenue generating sources, right? Is there new demand for low carbon fuels? Is there demand for low carbon products? And could that give you a competitive advantage in the marketplace? So Kaitlyn, I think when you were talking about opportunities, that absolutely rings true to me. And, we've also been in the project development space doing offset projects that, is a new revenue source for a business. So that can, drive investment and drive change in the organization, because it's a great opportunity to create more value.
Dustin, what's the next question for us?
The next question comes from David in Massachusetts, and he asks, what is the best way to motivate corporations to invest in sustainable solutions?
I think there was more on that one.
Yeah, should we wait for heavy fines from regulators to scare corporations into investing, or should the consumer trends take over?
So to me, this is a question about regulatory trends, right? So I'm hearing, what is motivating corporations? Regulation, voluntary, say consumer-driven pressure, employee-driven, investor-driven. And I really think it's all of the above. I don't think it's like a one, where's the source of pressure that's the strongest. It's all there, in from almost all sides. And so I think with regard to trends, regulatory trends, whether or not the actual regulation comes to pass as in its original form, and we can look at the SEC climate disclosure rule as an example, right, where the initial proposal is quite extensive and quite, I'll just say quite extensive, and then the process of gathering comments, the process of the sort of public comment periods, and of course internal discussions about these things, it will probably end up with a much changed rule from the initial proposal. But that entire process has been enough for companies to really say, wow, this is incredibly important if it's being taken up by the SEC, and we want to get ahead of it, right? So I think it's not just, the final piece of regulation. I think it's all of the process and years working towards that, and also mitigating the risks of those changes that has really driven a lot of the current action that we see. Erika, did you have something you wanted to add? I saw nodding, I thought.
Well, I was agreeing with you, but I also think, some folks can get frustrated waiting for government action, right? And so that's where, activist investors came in to try and move things forward. BlackRock was a big example of that. And consumers are also giving those flags, but the regulatory piece is an important tool, right? There's always the carrot and the stick, right? And I think in the U.S. there's a lot of carrots out there with the Inflation Reduction Act, creating a lot of incentives for reduction, and then there's sticks around the EPA proposing new regulations, SEC being one of those sticks as well.
Amanda, anything to add, or do we want to flip it back to Dustin?
Let's flip it back to Dustin. I think you did both a really great job of covering and kind of just echoing and agreeing. I would just only echo and agree with your sentiments.
That's great. Yeah. The next question comes from Elliot in Texas, who asks, there have been several significant macroeconomic events in the last 2 years, from the COVID-19 pandemic to war in Ukraine and rumors of recession. Have you perceived a change in client demands or expectations over this period, and do you see any trends for the near future?
I see global risk coming more tangible than ever before, especially coming out of the pandemic and also with the invasion of Ukraine. I've also heard the conversation about energy security, not only in light of that war, but also because of different events in California and Texas that have caused the grid go out. So I'm hearing those change the conversation, but perhaps bring up topics that we thought that we had solved already back up. So I think that's been an interesting change.
And I would say that, changing client demands or expectations, I think, broadly speaking, when it comes to climate action, there's no fundamental change in direction. I mean, that is still the direction everyone is headed. Now, while some companies maybe are, say, putting off a big chunk of a scope of work, right? Like, well, let's do these pieces, but maybe we'll save this one to next year, where we thought we were going to do it all at once, right? There might be some certain cost saving or spreading of costs related to these actions, but there's no like, oh, we're not going to do this anymore. So I would say it's still fundamentally happening. We see no evidence that that's changing, but there's certainly, perhaps with more the macroeconomic and recession, fears than anything else, perhaps more cost savings or cost consciousness around the work, but certainly not the fundamental trend.
Something else that I'll add to is I think it also brought our supply chains into focus, the risks that we face in our supply chains, not only supplying, but also thinking about how will we build out this energy transition, and whether it's a global risk because of different political things happening, or where we're sourcing critical materials from. It's, I think, an interesting refocus on understanding how global our supply chains are and what risk and opportunities always could be presented with that, along with connected with the energy transition or the transition to a low carbon economy.
Okay, back to you, Dustin.
Yeah, perfect. Next question comes from Preeti in New York City, who asks, what's the most challenging part about being a podcast host? Which one podcast guest or episode caused a 180-degree shift in your perspective about the work that we do?
Well, I can answer what's most challenging, and that's that after joining ClimeCo, the marketing team made us do video. So now we have to, make sure our hair is brushed before we record.
I agree. No, I would say that I thoroughly enjoy this. I love having conversations. I'm a curious person. I love learning. And so every opportunity, every conversation with a guest is an opportunity for me to learn. And also, and share with other folks what I've learned, what I'm curious about. So yeah, I love it. I think the other follow-up part of that question was there any guest that made you change your thinking a lot? I forget how exactly it was phrased. And I would say that for me, there wasn't, I wouldn't say anything like 180-degree thinking, perhaps because I've been in sustainability for a long time. I'm curious, I like to read, I like to keep up with stuff as well. But a lot of them have expanded my thinking. So I like that.
Yeah, and I'm not only saying this because Greg is here today on the webinar, but Greg Watson was the first person that inspired this whole paradigm shift series concept, where we're really looking at how fundamentals in financial markets are really have driven the ESG trend. And so for me, who did not come from finance, for me, those were both Greg's and Rick Alexander's episode, and we have another one coming out with Dr. Raj Gopal from Columbia University. Those ones that really dig deep into the fundamentals of why and how ESG is as a trend in, say, financial reporting and in capital markets is really a response to the inadequacy of traditional reporting, of traditional company valuation models, Rick's talked about modern portfolio theory and how, and I actually have to look back at my note. I took a note for this because I'm still wrapping my head around it, but how corporations are incentivized to externalize costs, which those costs are then borne by diversified portfolio investors. So that was another moment where it was just my head exploded because I was like, wow, I've never thought of it in that way. So for me, those episodes where it's an area that I don't have a strong background in, that I really have gotten so much of out of those conversations. And I'm really just grateful to all of our guests who say yes, because we get to learn from all of them.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to having those experiences and learning from different guests. And I've really enjoyed listening to the podcast over the last year.
Yeah, every week is a new adventure, right? We have another question here, which is which episode stands out as one that you learned from the most? How has the ESG space evolved from episode 1 to 100? And do you have any funny mishap moments from your time recording?
Well, I would say how has ESG evolved from episode 1, which I believe was January 2021 or 2020. I can't remember, 21, to episode 100. So it's kind of sad but true, but you could joke that nothing of value is really, really real until it's become a political football. And, ESG achieved that status, for better, for worse, late last year. And so it's kind of interesting that when we started this, when there was such a dearth of content, there's just nothing good online about ESG when we started this 100 episodes ago. And we were really trying to fill that gap with some of these thoughtful conversations about this somewhat obscure topic. And then, in this very short year and a half, it's become this, a political firestorm, and everyone's confused about what it means. And I keep telling people to go back to our original "What is ESG" episode. So I think that's a really interesting development, that just solidifies how valuable and important the conversation is, frankly.
Dustin, wait, there's 3 parts to that question, and I wanted to answer one of the, but I already forgot. Will you go back?
Is there an episode that stands out for the one that you learned the most from?
And there was another part of that question too.
Do you have any funny mishap moments or bloopers or?
Oh, well, the good thing with the podcast, it's not live, so we get to edit all those stuff out. But there's a ton of times where I've just like that, forgotten what I was talking about or forgotten the question. But you wouldn't know because it gets edited out in the end.
I will say that when we were in Oklahoma City recording the episode with Mark Behrman, who's the CEO of LSB Industries, and our CEO, Bill Flutterbach, was there because they've known each other for a long time. LSB, for if anyone who hasn't listened to that episode, was ClimeCo's very first offset developer client. So many, many years ago, for nitrous oxide abatement in Baytown, Texas, actually. And that is, I believe, still operating. So we were out in Oklahoma and at this studio, but it was one of those situations where you get there and you're like, is this it? Am I in the right place? And then no one was there, and then once we finally got in, it was just funny because the crew that was filming they were clearly, high attention to detail, because every little sound from outside, like a garbage truck would pass and they would make us stop. They'd be like, no, stop, we have to stop. So that was, and a plane goes overhead, a garbage truck, a siren, and they made us stop every time. So that episode was incredibly long to actually get through and finish. But I think the product in the end was worth it. But that was definitely one of those funny situations where we kept looking at each other like, oh my God, we're never gonna finish this.
No one ever knows what gets left on the cutting room floor, so that helps. We're running out of time here, so I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today.
Thank you
to celebrate the 100th episode, and welcome Erika again to the team.
Thank you.
For our future ESG Decoded podcast episodes. I'm going to put in the chat here a link to the ClimeCo page that shows everywhere you can find the podcast, of course, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and everywhere and anywhere that you can watch it at your own convenience, so you don't have to be at the live webinar. But if you do enjoy the live format, let us know in the chat or Q&A if you'd like to see us do this again. You can submit any questions ahead of time, and we'll be sure to answer them when we can. And make sure to follow our social channels at ESG Decoded on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So just thank everybody for joining us, attending today. And then, of course, our great hosts, Erika, Kaitlyn, and Amanda, for putting this on. So we are going to record this and release this as a regular episode, and we will see you then. So thank you, everybody, for participating, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Great,
everyone.
thank you.